aspirations. But as the world faces mounting challenges, from the climate crisis to economic inequality, questions about its relevance are growing louder. Demands for accountability and reparations for Britain's imperial past, alongside calls for greater action on modern challenges, are testing the Commonwealth's unity and influence. At COP29 in Baku, Secretary-General Patricia outlined bold solutions. Yet, with member states grappling with colonial legacies and shifting global power, can the organisation deliver? The Commonwealth Secretary-General, Patricia talks to Al Jazeera. Secretary-General, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera. Here at COP29, we're hearing about the urgent need, not for billions of dollars around the world, but for trillions of dollars around the world. In your experience, how urgent is that need among Commonwealth countries?
It's absolutely critical, because if you look at how many countries we have, 56, 33 of them are small, 25 of them are small island developing states. And what we're seeing is many of our member states are struggling. They're either drowning as a result of sea level rise or in debt, which has been associated with climate disasters. The Commonwealth now has about $4.5 trillion of debt that we are helping our member states, 50 of them, to manage. And there's a direct correlation between the climate disasters that they've suffered and the debt they now experience.
How do you manage that debt? I mean, what's the process?
We've created a system called Meridian, which is able to manage both public and private debt, to enable our countries to better manage it, to understand how to move it, and how to control the aberrant impacts. One of the terrible things we have is because many of our small and developing countries cannot even get the appropriate loans that they wish, and because of the level of debt. Now, if you have become insolvent in effect because of your own misdeeds, that's one thing. But if you look at what many of our small states suffer from, and I'll take my own country of birth, Domenica. In 2015, we were doing well, medium-sized countries, economy, no real problems, fiscally sound. Domenica was then hit by Tropical Storm Erica and lost 95% of her GDP in about 6 hours. She was on her knees after that. 2 years later, in 2017, suffered from the biggest hurricane the world had then ever seen, Hurricane Maria, which destroyed 226% of her GDP.
And these kind of events are happening around the world all the time,
Absolutely.
Especially to those very vulnerable nations. So how important is it that here we see success in the form of at least $1 trillion as an outcome?
It is vitally important that the world gets serious about this, because 1.5 degrees is actually about to be reached. There's times when we've reached it, we've dipped below, and we've reached it again. That is the death knell for many of our countries, because when that sea level rises, it means some of our countries will be subsumed by the ocean, and the land mass will literally disappear, and people will lose their lives, their livelihoods, and their homes, their histories, and will have to move to a totally different country. And that's happening now.
And talking about the ocean, you've had this recent Commonwealth Ocean Declaration, which is a big step forward. Tell us about that.
Well, it was of pivotal importance. When I came in as Secretary-General in 2016, we identified that sea level rise was going to capture a number of our countries, and they would disappear. And so we were determined right then that we would have some mechanism to say that if the sea took the land, it wouldn't take the jurisdiction, the boundaries that they own and have had for millennia. And this new declaration, which our 56 countries signed, basically says that once your marine boundaries are set, it doesn't matter if the sea takes away your land, you will still own your ocean. And if you realise what's so important. If you have not been responsible for this sea level rise, it is so unjust that because of things done by others, you not only lose your land, but you lose the ocean over which you have jurisdiction. Because at the moment they say you have jurisdiction over ocean where the land abuts the sea. So if you have no land, the argument could be that you lose your sea also. And this declaration that we have made, our 56, say basically that's unjust, it shouldn't happen, and we're going to fight for it.
And the impressive thing about that was the universal agreement here, and that doesn't demonstrate. I mean, in a way, it's an antidote to those who say that, well, you know, the Commonwealth, it's had its days, there is no role for it, but actually demonstrated
it's a phenomenal role.
The need,
because we have everyone in our family, rich ones, poor ones, landlocked, island states. We have every culture, every religion, and yet we share common values, common institutions, common desires, and that drives us forward. And if you look at what happened in 2018, and then in 2022 and 2024, there were so many issues about which the world couldn't agree. And yet we, as a Commonwealth, as basically a petri dish of the world, with everyone there, because we sit round the same table, because we are equals when we sit round that table, doesn't matter if you're India with 1.4 billion people or you're Nauru with 11,000 people, you're given the same respect, and we listen to each other. And it's because the Commonwealth listened that in 1989, that's 3 years before the first COP, the Commonwealth was the one who said, if we don't do something about climate change, it will pose an existential threat. And if you look back at the Langkawi Declaration, the tragedy is everything that's happened since was set out in that declaration. Our countries coming together to say, we have to do something. And
people knew it was coming.
They knew it was coming, and we were fighting it.
Yeah.
And we're still fighting it today, but maybe a little more successfully than we did before.
Of course, you're talking the positives. There are plenty of people who see the negatives in the Commonwealth, as you know. What about reparations? I mean, the Commonwealth is historically associated with the British Empire. What role should the Commonwealth play in the reparations, say, for slavery?
Well, one of the things that we were able to talk about in Samoa was reparatory justice, which goes far wider than just saying reparations. And we decided, all of us, all 56, that this was a conversation which time has come, and that conversation has been started.
But what does that mean, reparatory justice, as opposed to reparations?
Well, reparatory justice looks at some of the cultural and other consequences that have come to slavery. We are talking about changing people's mindsets, and that's not just about money. It's about how people think. I mean, I had quite an extraordinary experience in New York in September, where I was walking along the street with 3 other women of colour and a wonderful CEO who was white, female and blonde. And as we walked down the street, someone on the side shouted at those of us and said that we were niggers and we should go back to where we came from. In September 2024, you can't change a mindset with money. There's more we have to do to understand that there are still consequences of our history. And what is fantastic about our Commonwealth is because we're all around that table, all of us, those of us who were responsible, those of us who suffered, and those of us in between. So that conversation as to how we globally respond and make reparations so that we can deal with education, we can deal with the other issues, are really important. And
do you think reparations should be a priority? Personally?
You know what's really fantastic about being Secretary General? I represent 56 countries,
Right.
and it's for my countries to determine how they're going to deal with this matter. When I'm no longer Secretary General, I'll be happy to talk about what I may or may not think.
The need to say sorry, how important is that?
One of the things that's been really important is lots of people have already said sorry, and that is not necessarily the only issue. So I'm looking forward with great anticipation to the fact that all our leaders, and it's not just one country, it's all of them, are going to talk about how we deal with this issue. And what was great, if you remember, it was the Commonwealth who looked at not only racial discrimination, but also anti-apartheid. And it was significant that when Madiba Mandela came out of prison, where did he come to straight away? Is the Commonwealth Marlborough House to say thank you for the fact that the Commonwealth had been brave enough to face it, to fight for it, and to talk about it.
Okay.
And we've never run away from anything.
Right. Do you think that, I mean, what is it, 9 years, your tenure pretty well, when you
Yes.
finish in, what, April next year?
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
right, coming to an end. Do you think enough progress has been made in that time? Have you been surprised? Have you been impressed? I mean, what's your sense of the changes that have happened on this?
I've been really delighted about what the Commonwealth has done on all the things that matter. Look at what we've done on climate. We came up with the Blue Charter. People said, you'll never be able to do it. It'll take 10 years. We did it in less than 10 months. We've come up with the Living Lands Charter. We've recognised the need for blue economy and the green economy. So we came up with the Universal Vulnerability Index, which has led to the multi-dimensional vulnerability index, which is going to make a huge difference. We are now looking at common space. So we're looking at the geospatial data that we need to understand how we can interdict on climate change.
So that's interesting. Tell me about that.
Well, what we did is many of our countries didn't have the granular data that they needed to demonstrate that climate change was real, that climate change was having an impact, and how they could mitigate and adapt. So we created a common sensing with UNITAR, UNISAT, the British Space Agency, and ourselves. We took that data and we used it to help our member states, and we created a climate finance access hub. And with just $8.2 million, we've already delivered $366 million into the hands of our member states, with another $500 million in the pipeline. So it's not talk, and we have dealt that with from scratch. In 2015, that was an aspiration, an idea, and in 2016, when I came in, we turned that aspiration into reality. We hope that our climate finance access will be able to be one of the entities that will be used to deliver real money, as opposed to just aspirations. And that would not have happened unless our countries came together. Look at what we've done on AI. We've created an AI academy. The economy of the world will be increased by $15.7 trillion by 2030. We are determined that all of our member states should have a part of that 15.7 trillion.
So it's all good things, clearly. All good, excellent things. But bringing it back to the future of the Commonwealth, you're seeing countries like Barbados, who recently became a republic, and other countries considering it. Are we going to see this more and more? What are the implications for that on the Commonwealth?
You know, one of the things which is really fascinating is people don't understand that in 1949, when the new Commonwealth was born, it was born because 8 countries wanted to be republics. And in making themselves republic, they still wanted to be in alignment with our member states. As Commonwealth countries, we now have 36 republics. And so when Barbados became a republic, it just became one more republic within the Commonwealth family. No one leaves the Commonwealth. Every single country who has ever left has either come back or is applying to come back. So this Commonwealth has never been stronger, and we have countries from who've never been part of the British Empire all wanting to join us. I don't seem to go anywhere.
What sort of countries are there? Who are you talking about?
Well, we have, if you look at the countries who've joined us since we've had Mozambique, we've had Cameroon, we've had Rwanda, we've had Togo, we've had Gabon. All these countries are coming, and when you ask them, they ask why, they're looking at the things like you have a 21% advantage if you trade with another Commonwealth country. We have the same language, we have the same common law, we have the same parliamentary system and the same institutions. Now that 21% means that we've now grown our intra-Commonwealth trade to now is about 950 billion. It should be 1 trillion by 2026, 2 trillion by 2030. It has grown exponentially during periods where other trade took a dip. So, for example, during COVID, we thought that the 700 billion that was then there would drop significantly because everyone else's trade was dropping. And it didn't. It grew from 700 to 721. And when we looked at it, 140 trillion came from digital trade.
Okay.
And when we said why, it was because of trust. So that digital trade has grown 400%. So that's why people are joining us, because we are high on the Mo Ibrahim Good Governance indices. We've got 21 African states. Mm-hmm. We are high on every other indices.
So what about the role of the British King, King Charles, as head of the Commonwealth? Isn't that just an anachronism now, and that really needs to change, and something that many of the states would like to see?
No, because in 2018, all the Commonwealth leaders came together to make a decision about who they wished to take over when Her Majesty was no longer with us. And this is not an hereditary position. And so in 2018, when the leaders came together, they could have chosen anyone. And the reason they unanimously chose the then Prince Charles, and they were very specific, they didn't say the Prince of Wales, they named him by his full name, was because for more than 50 years he had dedicated himself, as the Queen before him, to their service. His work on young people, his work on the environment, and they felt that it would be an appropriate person to become head of the Commonwealth. And there's still no hereditary principle, and so the leaders can choose whomsoever they wish to be the head of the Commonwealth, and they happened to choose King Charles III unanimously. I think it's probably the only election he will ever enter where he has unanimous a vote. So I think it wasn't unusual, and it was specific, and I think it was merited because of the contribution he'd made for his whole life to their service.
We have these colonial era policies that still impact land ownership, especially with Crown land restrictions. How can the Commonwealth help island nations deal with that and secure better land rights?
Well, we have our Commonwealth Law Ministers meeting. We had a very successful Law Ministers meeting in Zanzibar, where the law ministers of the 56 countries came together, and they were able to talk about all or any issue which they wished. So that platform is there if that was an issue they wanted to come together. But I tell you what they did focus on. They focused on the future. And at that meeting, the Commonwealth was the first to come up with a model law for virtual assets. A model law which has been so successful that the FATF, the organization who monitor, say that it should be the global model. So that's another demonstration of how, when our 56 countries concentrate on what other people find an intractable problem, we come up with a solution with which they can all be happy. And one of the things that we found is if the Commonwealth comes up with a solution, it's usually a good pathway for the rest of the world.
And talking of pathways, I mean, here at COP, we're looking at indigenous communities playing a bigger role, and clearly there's a lot of indigenous communities within the Commonwealth. How do you better give them a pathway to having their voice heard? Yeah, not only in the sense of the way forward, but also how they used to manage things back in the day before British Empire came in, or before colonial times.
Well, we have agreed in 2022 something called the Living Lands Charter, which seeks to implement the 3 Rio Conventions. And one of the major pathways, we have 5, but one of the major ones is on indigenous people and indigenous knowledge. Because what we're finding is a lot of the indigenous knowledge, which we have not taken full advantage of, is there to help us come up with the solutions that we need for the future. So, for example, the way in which the wells were used in Sri Lanka to make sure that the water came from the north to the south. These are learnings that we are rediscovering because they make a difference. And what the Commonwealth is doing now is concentrating on this indigenous knowledge, trying to preserve it and trying to enhance it, so we have all the benefit of the technology of the future, but we're saving the wisdom of the past as well.
And can that help with modern disaster preparation?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What sort of instances of that would there be?
Well, what we are looking at is, for example, how we husband the land, because some of the intensive programs for agriculture has, if you like, degraded a lot of the topsoil. So how do we look back at finding the issues and the way in which our ancestors kept the land, and go back and use the current technology to basically understand why it worked and how it worked, and then to be able to share that with others. And we're finding that that is a really successful way of helping our members.
When you took on your role nearly 9 years ago now, what were you aware of that needed change? And have you managed to achieve everything that you aim to do at that point?
Well, I think I probably have. I've got one more to go, which is the launch of our common space, which is using all the geospatial data from all our space agencies and our meteorological agencies to come up with some of the solutions that we need. But we knew that climate was going to be a huge issue. We also knew that non-communicable diseases was going to be an issue, and we feared that there may be a pandemic. In 2019, we said that there was likely to be a pandemic within the next 5 years, and our health ministers started to prepare for it. None of us really thought it was going to hit us by December of that year, and that by March of the next year we'd be in lockdown. But we were certainly clear that we would have to go digital, and I was very proud that in 2018 we started to create a digital platform in the Secretariat, so that when in March 2020 everyone else went into lockdown, we, I think, were the only multilateral organisation which never stopped, not for a moment, because we went from 24-hour face-to-face to 24-hour digital like that. And we were ready. So I think there were so many things, but the reason I think we have delivered all the things I hoped was because of the amazing generosity of our member states. Their frankness, their ability to share with each other not just the things that we are good at, but we shared our failures, because our failures teach us as much as our successes. And the reason the Commonwealth has done so remarkably well, I believe, in that last 9 years, is because they genuinely care about each other. People don't like the word love, but what I have seen is that our 56 care for each other. And any time I've asked any of our members, will you help me? Will you share this? They've done it. And we've had 27 countries during those 9 years who have been in difficulties. And yet we have been able to have peaceful, supportive initiatives which have worked because we've had help from all the member states who supported each other.
Finally, Secretary General, there are storm clouds ahead, aren't there, in the way the world is right now, not
Absolutely.
only in climate change, but global security and everything. What's your advice to your successor, especially given all of that, and in the more sort of local sense of the Commonwealth itself, because the whole issue of reparations and returning stolen artefacts and all those issues that surround this, they're not going to go away, they're going to increase. So what's your advice to your successor on this, and what's your sense of what the future holds for the Commonwealth?
I think my advice would be to trust your leaders, stay close to them, listen to them, understand the areas which are a real challenge, but also to trust them, and also to be aware that what the media says of you is not necessarily the truth. And so it's interesting for me to hear from you that you see that reparations is going to be a huge issue. I can only tell you that it's an important issue, but it was one of the issues on our agenda that we spent the least amount of time, not because it was the least important, but because there was such a willingness to solve it. So I would say, trust them, and this will be one of the greatest privileges of your life, to be able to walk beside countries in their moments of real joy, but their moments of deep hurt and difficulty. And if you keep your eye on solutions, you'll find that they will come. And I hope that God will bless her in the way in which God has certainly blessed me, with the ability to just stay the course.
Secretary General, thank you for talking to us.